Working. Hello? Hmm.
None of them work. None of them work.
Hello? Alright. We got the graph today.
None of them work.
Okay. Today we're talking about likely political outcomes and wish thinking. There are two outcomes for this country. So over here we got country. And there are two possible outcomes, right? There's the mythological narrative that we're going to democratically get ourselves out of this. So there's this mythological thinking that even though all this bad stuff's happening to our country, like, you know, ICE attacks, white Christian nationalism, SpaceX IPOs that are only going to be used to rob your retirement accounts, feudalism, you know, you name it, government corruption, unchecked militarism, literal fall of Rome gladiator type events on the White House lawn. I mean, you name it. This is the fall of Rome. However long that takes, you know, whatever. But people, as we kind of go across this timeline, they kind of end up going, you know, we got two solutions. The very first one, as we all kind of lull ourselves into non-existence, is we're going to vote ourselves out of this. All right. The reason this one's not going to work is because we already don't have a democracy. Number two is that I couldn't imagine, you know, voting alongside a class of people who kind of refuse to point a mirror at themselves. You know, if I was, you know, just looking at New Jersey, for instance, noticing the non-whites getting picked up off the street, I couldn't more or less think about how I could vote with someone like that in a democratic way. So again, there is this narrative, or there's this wish thinking that suggests our country is going to vote ourselves out of this. It is not. I hope that is patently obvious at this point. Now, the other solution is that once we finally figure out that democracy is not going to work, what else is going to happen? Well, now, without forming a false dichotomy, we simply observe the behaviors that is leading to the destruction of our country. So, for instance, what's currently happening in Mexico, and Mexico is a little bit more progressive than America is at this point. But what has happened up until this point for Mexico? Well, they got cartels in government. When the government, again, can no longer be held accountable for doing something like, I don't know, child sex trafficking or fucking kids, what point is the use of that government? And even more so, that only just keeps begging questions. How does this country behave on the average constituent, or with respect to the average constituent? So that means most of us are simply walking around with the wish thinking that the, so to speak, rule of law still applies to them. It does not. And when that is the case, what is going to happen as a result? Well, you're going to have militia states. Okay, it's as simple as that. Notice what is currently taking the fold in our schools right now is what is known as this Charlie Kirk idea. What is that called? It's not MAGA. It's it's something, but it's all over our schools right now because, you know, what happens when you defund the Department of Education? What ultimately replaces it, we've already gone over it in this channel, is, well, your ideas cling on to the easiest thing to cling on to, and what better thing to cling on to than barbarism around the idea that whites are better than everybody else. the reason these militia states will get worse and worse is because this dog of racism that refuses to point the mirror at itself doesn't understand the other dog that is already biting at its neck. Okay? These ideas that I have talked about for when was 2015? So that's over 11 years now. When I've been going on diatribes about religious thinking, just how dangerous that is. Look where it leads to. And when all I have to do is simply point outside and go like, look at what you guys see, the religious, right? And I still have an audience of people who are fundamentally detached from the way the world is because they refuse to look at themselves for what they are. Um, yeah, scary times, but the least I'm going to be anymore is scared of someone like that. Just because someone refuses to educate themselves doesn't mean I won't be like, okay, you guys at least have the ability to recognize danger at this point. Is that right? Oh, well, you clearly don't anymore because you're stuck in this false delusion that suggests that you are somehow a chosen people, for instance, or that you're luckier because of God's grace, to name another example. Or really, maybe let's just call it what it is. You're stuck behind your own specific version of white privilege at this point. And these ideas and frameworks of mind are inherently implosive. Again, if I may name some of the creditable authors who have already done the research around this: Freud, Jung, Adler, Edinger, Robert Moore, just to name five. All of these people understood where the Western psyche was going. All of them understood that how extremely explosive this framework of mind that refuses to point the mirror of cognition inwards. We are simply experiencing those effects today as a culture, and what better way to understand these effects than simply looking at our presidency and the behaviors around it? Again, what is the current president but a symbol of the population that he actually represents? So, again, these are the two options that are myth thinking. Or, excuse me, this is the option that's myth thinking. This is what's actually going to happen. The militia states. Militia. What are these militia states going to look like? Well, the ICE and the military are going to fuse together. That's going to be one big one. And then, since there is no rule of law, what's ultimately going to come out of this kind of system of this fugue state, this feudal fugue state, we're going to have other militia states. Just like we understand from what happens over in the Middle East when we bomb the fuck out of those countries. Just like we understand that happens to Mexico when we more or less sanction their country into non-existence. Yeah, this is pretty cool stuff. So there's still this audience of people who more or less believe that, you know, their children's got a good future in a system like that, or for instance, data centers are going to somehow be used for their freedom. The sheep that is the modern Western white person, they truly do have what is coming to them, don't they? If they truly cannot see the epic meteor that is their own racism getting ready to own everything they thought they cared about, then good God, do they deserve that meteor?